By the time I turned off 6th Avenue and wound my way into the quiet grid of North Tacoma, I felt like nothing more than a shell. 16 hours of tying rebar and hauling steel at the Point Ruston site had stripped me hollow. My shoulders ached from the rain-soaked beams, my hands pulsed with rope burns, and no amount of rubbing could scrub away the cement grit ground into my skin. All I wanted was the same thing I'd craved every night since I was a kid in this house. A shower hot enough to sting, a meal that didn't come in a paper bag, and sleep untouched by anyone's demands. The streets shimmered under the drizzle that never really leaves this city. I pulled up in front of the old craftsman I'd once painted with my dad, Graham, back when he still came home more nights than not. The maple out front bent in the damp wind, just like it always had. I trudged up the porch steps, shoulders slumped under my duffel, and slid my key into the lock. It caught. I wiggled it, tried again, felt the brass resist as if the house itself didn't recognize me. For a second, I thought exhaustion had made my grip weak. But then the door swung open. Diane stood there, framed by the porch light. Hair knotted neatly like she'd come straight from yoga, leggings spotless, phone still glowing in her hand. The smile on her face said she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Behind her, Kellen, her son, never mine, was sprawled across the couch, wearing my old Pacific Lutheran hoodie, his laugh echoing through the house like he'd inherited the walls too. "You're back early," Diane said, as if the locks hadn't just refused me. "The key doesn't work," I answered, my voice raw with dust. "We changed them," she replied, tone calm but sharp as glass. "For safety." And in that word, it was clear whose safety she meant. Watching Kellen dig into a bag of chips I'd bought told me everything else. My hand clenched tighter around the useless key. I stepped back into the chill, already feeling the weight of a fight I hadn't yet named. When she leaned against the frame, still smiling, I knew this night was just the opening move of something heavier waiting to unfold. Diane didn't bother with small talk. She folded her arms and said the locks were changed because I'd fallen behind. Then she pulled a paper from the counter, crisp, rehearsed. Back rent, utilities, shared expenses, she listed them off, tapping the columns she'd drawn in tidy handwriting. 50,000, she said. "Pay that, and you can stay under this roof." Behind her, Kellen gave a low whistle and tossed his phone onto the couch. "That's just one solid union check, right? You'll manage." He grinned, tugging my hoodie closer around his shoulders, like wearing what was mine made it his. The duffel strap dug into my arm, but I didn't put it down. My eyes drifted past Diane's satisfied face, scanning details the way I did on site when something didn't line up. New screws gleamed silver against the worn brass of the strike plate. On the hall table, a locksmith's card peeked out from beneath a scented candle. Their little plan sat right there in plain sight. "Did he approve this?" I asked at last, keeping my tone steady though my throat felt raw. Diane's smirk didn't move. "He's consulting overseas. While he's gone, this is my house. My rules." Her certainty hit harder than her math ever could. This wasn't about debt or fairness. It was about power. About deciding who was allowed to stand in the doorway. I let the silence hang between us, my grip loosening around the key. No yelling. No bargaining. Just the hollow quiet that comes when something breaks, and you finally stop trying to hold it together. I stepped back, the porch boards groaning beneath my boots. Diane lifted her chin like she just claimed victory. But I'd already seen what her little act had revealed. Without saying a thing, I turned and started down the steps, the night air growing sharper as I made my way toward the truck, toward the memories sealed inside that red file I'd never had the nerve to open until now. The glow from the porch light dimmed behind me, yet the heaviness in my chest pulled me further into the past than the road ahead. That house still held its ghosts. Memories clung to the walls like smoke, sharper now that I no longer belonged inside. After my mother's funeral, Dad remarried faster than I could process. Diane arrived with her boxes that smelled of department stores, stacking them right over the cinnamon candles Mom always lit through winter. Within weeks, every photo of my mother vanished, replaced with glossy prints of bridges and skylines that meant nothing to anyone under that roof. The warm scent of cinnamon was gone too, swapped for lavender sprays and the hum of a fridge filled with Kellen's energy drinks. Dad said, He was giving me stability when he left for overseas contracts. But that house never stayed still. When pipes leaked or the furnace rattled, it was me crawling under sinks, tightening bolts, keeping everything upright. I learned to carry that house the same way I carried rebar, quietly, hoping someone would notice. No one ever did. On my 21st birthday, Dad came home for a short break between jobs. He took me to a notary's office in the Stadium District, a place that smelled of old ink and paper. He slid some documents toward me, explaining little, only saying it was for security. I signed where he pointed, half listening, wondering why my birthday gift required so much formality. When I asked what it all meant, he told me to keep the files safe, maybe forever sealed. Think of it as a map, he said, one you might never have to unfold. I'd locked that red file away in the box behind my truck seat, trusting his word. Now, standing out in the cold after Diane's smug dismissal, I knew exactly where that map was waiting. I wasn't going to stand on that porch like a beggar, asking for entry to a home that had once been mine. The truck's engine hummed as it carried me down the slick curve of Ruston Way, the air thick with salt water and diesel from the construction site. The skeletal frame of steel beams rose against the dark sky, tarps whipping in the wind like restless sails. I grabbed my duffel from the cab, spread it across a plywood platform beneath the scaffolding, and pulled a neon safety vest over my chest for warmth. It wasn't comfort, but it was mine. No one could change the locks on concrete that hadn't hardened yet. The night settled heavy. I lay flat, listening to the rain tap through the tarp seams, watching cranes drift like giant shadows overhead. Every ache in my body echoed the long day behind me, but the silence dug deeper than fatigue. I thought of that house, not as it stood now, but how it once was. Cinnamon candles glowing in the kitchen. My mother's hugs lasting long enough to mend whatever was broken. Those memories filled the cold air around me, and for once, I didn't try to chase them away. Before dawn, I sat up, breath clouding in the sharp air, and reached behind the truck seat to the lockbox. The red folder had sat in the same spot for years, its corners frayed from being handled but never opened. My fingers paused before finally pulling it free. Inside were 3 documents, a recorded deed naming me the sole owner of the North 26 property, dated on my 21st birthday, a limited power of attorney meant for emergencies, and an unsigned letter written in my father's familiar handwriting. The paper shook slightly in my grasp as I began to read. If the air ever feels tight at home, this is why. The words landed on me with the weight of steel beams. I realized I'd been holding proof all along, a quiet weapon sealed inside paper and time. For years, I had mistaken loyalty for endurance, patching roofs, paying bills, following Diane's rules. But now, the truth sat in my lap, sharp, undeniable, and I understood it was finally time to use it. Outside, the first rays of morning light touched the rafters overhead. By the time the courthouse bell tolled 8, I was already walking up Pacific Avenue, the red folder clutched tight against my ribs like armor. Sleep had barely touched me since opening it. My father's note and the weight of that deed kept circling my mind. But fatigue was easier to carry than Diane's smirk. I stopped in front of a narrow brick office with a polished plaque on the window. Alan Brackett, attorney at law. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood and fresh coffee. Alan himself looked nothing like the courtroom warriors from TV. His hair thinning, his tie a little crooked, but his eyes held a quiet patience that only years of witnessing people at their breaking point could give. I sat across from him and laid the red folder open. Then I told him everything. How Diane had changed the locks, how she demanded $50,000 in back rent, how Kellen had laughed while wearing what was never his. My voice only faltered once, describing the moment the key refused to turn in my own door. Alan didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, glanced at the pages, and took neat, deliberate notes in block letters. When I finished, he tapped the deed lightly. "This is solid," he said. "Filed, valid, and unambiguous, which means we don't argue with them. We let the law speak." He leaned back. "Washington law requires a 20-day notice to end a month-to-month tenancy. If they don't comply, we file an unlawful detainer in Pierce County Superior Court. The court issues a writ of restitution, and the sheriff enforces it." I frowned. So I can't just... No, he interrupted gently. You don't change locks. You don't toss their things out. That's self-help eviction, it's illegal. Even as the rightful owner, you wait. You document everything, every call, every text, every demand, and let the court see who's reasonable and who isn't. His calm steadied something in me I hadn't realized was shaking. The anger was still there, but now it had purpose. We arranged for a professional process server to deliver the notice. Alan handed me a checklist for an evidence binder. Photos, receipts, proof of payment, and copies of every exchange. When I stepped outside, the drizzle over Pacific Avenue felt less like burden and more like clarity. I finally had a direction, not quick, but certain, and it would lead me straight back to Diane's door. That night, I sat in my truck's cab with a yellow pad balanced on my knee, the deed open beside me. Rage tempted me to scrawl in all caps to mirror Diane's cruelty in my own words. But Alan's advice echoed in my head. Keep it measured. Keep it professional. So I wrote instead, no rent is owed. I am the recorded owner. Enclosed is the 20-day notice to terminate occupancy. Any future correspondence about this issue was to go straight to the council. I typed the notice cleanly, printed 2 copies, and slipped one into a thick white envelope clearly marked with Diane's name. The other I mailed via certified post. A duplicate she couldn't pretend had gone missing. At dawn, the process server I'd hired drove off with the envelope, leaving me alone with the waiting. 2 blocks away, I sat in my truck, fingers locked around the steering wheel, eyes fixed on her porch through a slit in the cedar hedge. Right at 9, Diane stepped outside in slippers, phone already at her ear. A steaming mug clutched against the cold morning air. She bent down, picked up the envelope, and ripped it open without hesitation. The scream that tore out of her split the quiet street like an alarm. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. Dogs erupted in barks. Even a car slowed mid-turn. Kellen staggered into the doorway, hair tangled, hoodie hanging off one shoulder. He snatched the papers from her hands, his lips moving as his eyes darted across the page. Then came a string of curses, raw and loud. Minutes later, his face appeared online. A shaky video already spreading like wildfire. She's heartless, he spat into the camera. Kicked out her own family for nothing. My stepsister's a monster. Comments poured in faster than I could scroll. Strangers condemning me. Distant cousins demanding answers. Old acquaintances pretending they'd always known what kind of person I was. I didn't reply to a single one. Instead, I captured everything, screenshots, voicemails, every name attached to the noise. Proof wasn't measured in outrage or sympathy. It was organized quietly, page by page, in binders a judge would one day read. By the time the video spun out of control, I'd already closed the laptop and opened the binder, sliding the first screenshot into its sleeve. The work ahead would take weeks. The 20-day countdown began in silence, though Diane was never one to leave an audience waiting. On the 5th morning, 2 Tacoma police officers tapped on my truck window while I was parked outside the job site. Diane had filed a trespassing report, claiming I was harassing her. I showed them the deed and the official notice. They traded a look that said they'd seen plenty of this kind of family performance before. One gave a short nod. It's a civil issue. I wrote down the time, date, and their badge numbers in the binder. A week later, Diane threatened a restraining order. Her text puffed up with legal-sounding phrases that went nowhere. By then, she was telling relatives that my father had intended the house for her and Kellen, as if wishes could overwrite recorded deeds. Every call from a cousin or aunt went straight to voicemail. Each one was saved, transcribed, and filed away. I met with Ian twice more. His calm was an anchor against the storm Diane kept stirring. He reminded me to photograph every corner of the property, especially the rooms she claimed were hers, and to keep records of every utility I'd covered over the past year. I printed receipts, marked dates, and filed them neatly, evidence stacking like scaffolding on an unfinished building. Mrs. Sato, the retired teacher across the street, stopped me one afternoon. In her soft, deliberate way, she mentioned she'd seen a locksmith's van parked out front the day before the locks were changed. She offered to testify if needed. I thanked her and added her to the growing witness list. As the deadline neared, the tone of the messages changed. Anonymous numbers urged me to be merciful, to remember family. But mercy, in their eyes, meant giving up the roof over my own head. I copied every text into the binder and turned the page, fully aware the countdown was guiding me straight to the courthouse. The deadline passed. Diane didn't move. The next morning, Ian filed the unlawful detainer. Within days, we were standing under the vaulted ceilings of Pierce County Superior Court. The room carried the faint scent of polished wood and aging paper, a place where silence held more authority than sound. Diane sat across from me, her blazer pressed too perfectly for someone pleading hardship, hair pulled tight, eyes sharp with defiance. Behind her, Kellen shifted restlessly, glued to his phone, like attention itself was oxygen. When the commissioner called our case, Diane launched into her narrative, something about family fairness, about promises my father supposedly made, if not in writing then in spirit. She spoke of rent, of contributions I owed for the privilege of growing up under that roof. But when asked for proof, she had nothing. No lease, no receipts, no document connecting her words to the house she clung to. Ian laid the evidence out neatly, the deed, the 20-day notice, the binder thick with receipts, photos, and statements. My name repeated on every page like a refrain that couldn't be ignored. The commissioner's ruling came quickly, clean and precise. Possession restored, writ of restitution granted, interference forbidden. Diane's mouth opened in protest, but the gavel came down, final, unyielding. Outside, the cold air met us. Kellen's voice trailed behind, shouting into his phone about betrayal and bloodlines. Passers-by slowed, curious, but Ian only touched my arm, guiding me down the courthouse steps in silence. The order was signed, the date fixed. For the first time in weeks, the ground under me felt steady. When the morning of the writ arrived, I stood on the curb with the binder tucked to my chest, waiting for the deputy. The street was still except for the slow drip of rain from the eaves. Then a familiar sedan turned the corner, one I hadn't seen in years. My father stepped out, thinner, quieter, but clearer somehow, as though distance had burned away the fog he used to live in. Leora, he said softly, his voice carrying both regret and conviction. I've filed for divorce. I should have done it long ago. I see her now, and I see what I left you with. I searched his face for hesitation, but he held my gaze steady. He told me what I already knew from the documents in my hands, that the deed had been his way of protecting me from afar. He had always feared this day might come. His map had led me here. The sheriff's deputy arrived soon after, crisp in uniform, calm but commanding. Diane appeared in the doorway, arms crossed tight, Kellen trailing with half-filled boxes. Under the deputy's watch, they moved through the house, gathering the last pieces of a claim that had never truly been theirs. At the door, Diane turned, voice sharp and desperate. You owe us for family. Before I could respond, my father stepped forward. His tone was even, but it cut deeper than anger. Family doesn't send invoices for belonging. By dusk, the house was quiet again. Their voices were gone, their clutter packed and carried away. Only the hum of the furnace and the soft creak of the floors remained, sounds that finally belonged to me. I crossed the threshold, ready to meet the silence. That evening, I walked barefoot over the hardwood, each step deliberate, every light switched on not from fear, but from ritual. The house glowed as though it had waited all this time, patient through years of intrusion. In the living room, I unwrapped the framed photo of my mother, boxed away too long, and hung it where Diane's bland art once hung. Her smile settled the air in a way no candle ever could. Then came the locks. I replaced each one with care, the new hardware fitting into place like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The new keys, cut on 6th Avenue, were sharp and mine alone. The scar from the locksmith's drill marked the front door, a wound soon to be repaired. I scheduled a carpenter to fix it, determined to mend what had been forced open. In the following days, I worked through the details most people overlook, the quiet work of reclaiming a life. Over coffee on Ruston Way, I wrote lists, boundaries, maintenance, choices. I mailed certified copies of the court order to the utilities, shut down the accounts Diane had opened in my name, and sent one final letter through Ian's office, a clean end in ink. By the time I turned the key in my own lock, the house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a beginning. The walls still held my history, but the silence now belonged only to me. And as I stood in that doorway, I knew the story ahead was finally mine.